Okay, everybody, we're going to talk about how to write instructions, the overall actions for them, and the design of them. First of all, list all steps in the process. This doesn't come as intuitively as we'd think. For example, oftentimes we overshoot the steps because we don't realize that, wow, before they do the first step, they actually need a prior step. So often the beginning and the end isn't as clear. So draw a picture of a cat. Well, the first thing you need to do is probably locate the piece of paper, then pick up the pencil, and then move into the drawing. So you need to back it all the way out. When you list the steps, give yourself time. Walk away. Think about it. Come back to it, just as you would with a written draft. When you return, check for the thoroughness of the steps. Common sense so far. But that part is often helped by looking at other people's instructions. So look for other instructions on a similar point at this point in your process of drafting. Group related steps under headings. This will help people find the next step after completing one. We'll talk more about this. White space is your friend, and grouping them is your friend. So the example here is preparing the equipment, using the equipment, cleaning the equipment. 3 definite categories with sub-steps in each of those headings. Feel free to use bold, feel free to separate them into blocks. Feel free even to use boxes around those separate sections. All kinds of visuals of separation are helpful because what happens is the viewer is looking back and forth between the instructions and trying to fulfill them in their actions. Ask, can I use a graphic? The reason is because showing is always more powerful than telling. Are graphics always helpful? No, but it's a good idea to ask, can I use one? Let's talk about designing the layout now of instructions. Use numbered lists. We definitely need this. This helps readers see each step as a separate action. It also helps them come back to that point as a reference. Block related elements. Separate them by white space. Keep everything short. Place the most important item first in the step. Use the active voice and the imperative mood. Often begin with a verb. Active imperative verbs issue commands. Stop the engine is much more powerful than the operator should then stop the engine. It's assumed that the person following the instructions is the subject. So you can move, if you will, directly to the command. Highlight keywords. Often the keywords are those initial verbs that are the commands. You can put them in caps and you can put them in bold. But you can see in the example below that the verb itself, press, is not the key word in the phrase, press the return key. The return is the point. So they're accentuating that particular word here with the caps in the return. Bold, all cap letters, even in a different typeface, can stand out and can convey the critical information. Again, number the steps, and why? Because readers don't have to reread earlier directions to find out where they left off. You not only want to put blank lines between chunks of your particular directions, of your instructions or subheadings, but you also want to put them between steps. And generally the steps themselves are in single space. The white space helps you pick out, again, that particular step apart from its neighbors. If you can, this is very hard at times, but not embedding more than one action in one step. In the example that I shared with you guys in another lecture that accompanies this, the example does compress a few related steps, or actions I should say, in one step. The problem here is that it would be very easy for a reader to overlook a direction. if it's tucked in with other directions. And it would be easy for them to trip over, okay, what comes first, second, third, or they start jostling all those particular directives or commands in their brain. So what I often will do if they're related steps is I will give the overall step for the function, and then I will subdivide it into subpoints that people need to follow. So in the example that we had earlier and that I did a lecture on, I should say earlier, I did it earlier, is that when you're taking notes for a particular public body or agency or company, that as you're taking the notes during a vote for a motion, there are a couple different things you have to do. You have to make sure you get the names of the person that made a move for the motion. You have to get the results of the vote, yes or no. Excuse me, you also have to get the seconding of the motion, then the results, yes and no in favor of it, and any closing remarks or that come along with that motion. So there's a bunch of sub-steps, and in some case I will highlight that out. So it would be maybe step 3 in my instructions, but then 3.1, 3.2, 3.3. The important thing here, folks, is not to overwhelm the reader, not to overwhelm them with so many subsets that they might get confused or distracted. All right, within the steps, distinguish action from supporting information. When actions don't stand out, readers can make the errors, and that supports the previous point we just said. We don't want to clutter people. If it can be brief, but it can be clear, wow, that's awesome. Let's get it succinct. Let's get it condensed. Let's chop words out if we can. Let's get clear verbs that command and clear subjects or clear objects that need to be utilized to execute the command. Present the actions before the responses and group them as such. This is very, very important. Let's look at the example so this makes sense. When we press the return key here, we see the second step is the customer order screen will appear, or in this case, the 5th step. Is it really a step, or is it a result of press the return key? So now we go to the next supposed step. You can also use layout to make such distinctions. Well, it seems a jumble because now I've got 2 commands and then I've got a response or a result from one of the commands tucked in between, but they're all given the equal weight of being separate steps or separate numbers here, indicating they're separate steps. So the corrected example would be press the return key. Oh, here's the result. Notice it lines up right underneath that, and it doesn't line up with the number, it lines up with the text. That clearly groups it together. Oh, when I press the return key, then what happens? Oh, the customer order screen will appear. You could put the word result and colon in front of that phrase, the customer order screen will appear. You could. But even this grouping gets us the idea that here's the action, here's the response, it's one unit, and that's step 4, step 5 now. You can also use layout to make such distinctions. All right, last but not least, kind of rounding out here, you can always give the step and then explain it. So an example here is enter analyze. Not only after the verb and the command, you not only show the response, but in this case, the command prompts the computer to perform 7 analytical computations. So it explains what's going to happen. And in a sense, it's explaining the response, but it goes into a full sentence. Notice in this case, they decided to make the sentence all congruent with the action, so it's all continuing in a line. Not a bad idea either. Either option can work, just so you know. And lastly, create action-oriented headings. Use participles, not nouns, to describe the task. For example, use installing rather than the installation of the equipment. Any kind of verb made into a noun, which is called nominalization, like the word installation or collaboration, is very chunky and it's hard to decompress, understand, and execute. Installing tells me that that's what you're helping me do. We're installing this particular function. We're collaborating. We're not dealing with collaboration. And it allows us also to get much more to the point without a lot of words. All right, guys, good. Thanks. And we will see you guys. And hopefully that was helpful.